Hello and welcome to the EWA Podcast. My name is Craig and I am the EWA Podcast host. Last year we did 22 podcasts. 22. That's, like close to half the weeks in a year, right? That'd be like 26 or something. Anyways, this is the best of episode from the 22 podcasts last year. With the influx of new members in the EWA, I thought it would be great to give kind of a recap of what the EWA podcast at least used to be about. Now, I'll go ahead and apologize right now for dropping the ball on the EWA podcast, but it's kind of tough to set these things up at times. But I'm hoping to get back into the swing of things, and hopefully this best of podcast will help some new members maybe reach out to me and say, yeah, I would love to come onto this podcast, or some older people that haven't been on in a while say, yeah, I want to do that again. That was a lot of fun. Of course, if you were on the EWA podcast, I doubt you would call it a lot of fun. That being said, before we get started, I want to say thanks. I haven't formally said thanks, but I do want to now. As voted on by the EWA universe, Cody Rhodes was somehow miraculously voted Superstar of the Year for 2013. I'm not sure how, but I appreciate it. I put a lot of hard work and had a lot of fun in last year, and I just want to say thanks. I was more shocked than anything, as Brett and Jazz can attest. And I want to congratulate the other winners. Everyone who won was well-deserving, and I kind of feel super humbled by finishing third and Role Player of the Year and Cody winning Superstar of the Year. It really means a lot, and I appreciate it greatly. All right, so what we're going to do here now is we're going to chronologically go through the EWA podcast from last year, and we're going to start with podcast number 1. Podcast number 1 holds a special place in my heart, as it was the one that got this all started, obviously. I had reached out to Brett a little bit before the EWA's first podcast and mentioned the idea to him. He was totally on board and was happy to be the first guest for me. During the podcast, we had some connection issues, and it sounded like Brett was talking with a fishbowl on his head, only to come to find out that his fiancée, Kristen, was streaming Netflix the entire time. So we didn't exactly get the highest amount of quality for the first EWA podcast, but it was a lot of fun, and it was the one that set things going forward. And here's a little quibbit from the first EWA podcast to joggle your memory. And this is a clip from EWA podcast number 1. Here it is. Right, and you came in, you had a marvelous record throughout all of 2012.
Thank you.
Numerous countless wins against some great role players here in the EWA. But out of all those wins, is there one particular one that stands out more than the others? Like one that you maybe, like your role plays for that week, you felt like you really just like hit a home run that week, and that you really, was there one win that stands out in particular to you from 2012?
Well, it's funny. Probably the week that stuck out to me the most when I realized that my character had legs and that I could definitely do something with Val Venus was a week when I didn't win the match. I won one match but not the other. When we had the Civil War pay-per-view last year, and I defended the national title against Tyler Rex. It was really my first feud in the Fed. First guy that actually worked a storyline with me, and then turned around and went to the last man against in the Civil War match. Losing very closely to John Steve Carino. I went into that week really just saying I'm going to put my full effort in for both matches and see what happens. I personally really loved what I did with the kind of the Civil War battlefield themed role plays for the big match and the kind of blood feud stuff that was going on with me and Tyler Rex in terms of kind of capping off that feud. And I was really proud of the work I did then, and I thought it was some of the best work I've done since I joined EWA. And
From there, we moved on to EWA podcast number 2, and this is when it got tough for me to figure out who was the best guest to reach out to and have on. I wanted to reach out to those who were active in the EWA community at that point and had some stories that they'd like to share. For EWA podcast number 2, I turned to JD. JD, who we've all come to know and love now, started out as a rather shy Illinois boy who didn't really want to say much about anything. It was like he was going to the dentist and didn't want to tell the dentist which teeth he felt like had, cavities or anything like that. So it took a little prying and it took a little time, but I finally got JD to crack, and I finally got a little bit of emotion out of him. I think you guys know and remember this part of the podcast. This is the first time someone came out and just openly shared their feelings on someone. Here you go.
Bastards.
Yeah. Now, what went through your head when you read Val Venus pen Kurt Angle?
I don't know. Like, I thought it could have gone either way, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't want to offend anyone here, but my alcohol doesn't care if I do right now. So I'll just go ahead and say this. I was kind of disappointed. I wanted to see Bryce get there, just because, not because I thought Bryce did a better job than Brett or his team was better or anything. I just got this sort of, I just want to see someone else hold the tag titles. I'm just sort of tired of Nash and Page holding those tag titles. Like last year,
Right.
when I was Edge and Steen and I was feuding with them, it was like they were the most frustrating matches that I've had, because I wanted to beat them, and I wanted to beat them real bad, and I started blending in like EWA with reality because I read their role plays, and they're good guys, but they're like smug, cocky good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And like I sort of like blended that in with reality. I'd be like, these two douchebags, I probably really like this in real life, and I was just like, oh, I really want to beat them, and then.
Yeah.
Not being willing to let JD's feelings for the Vegas connection go aside, I decided to reach out to Cleve the next week and have him on as being part of the tag team that JD had just talked about. Now, while this clip from that podcast isn't an exact rebuttal, they all get along very well now. Right, guys? Anyways, I wanted to talk to Cleve, who's married, about his wife's interpretation and things that she knows about his relationship with Fuzz and the EWA in general. I was not disappointed with what Cleve had to say. Take a listen.
Does your wife know about Fuzz?
So here's the funny thing. She refers to him as my pen pal. And she kind of makes fun of me. You know, there'll be jokes. You know, somebody's in jail writing a letter to somebody else kind of thing. And somebody's doing charcoal drawings of each other. And she's a good sport about it. But she does joke, you know, where's your pen pal? And she knows a little bit about him. I tell her a few things about him just so she doesn't think, it's another girl. And now let me preface this by saying, if you knew what I look like, you would know she has nothing to worry about. But I do like to make sure she's got nothing to worry about there. And the thing about Fuzz is he's the single busiest guy in the world. So I don't talk to him nearly as much as I used to. But the nice thing is we've been working together for so long that we kind of anticipate how a role play is going to go. If I started, I know how he's going to finish it. We rarely review each other's work.
From there, we kept things in the Vegas Connection camp. It was the week after Civil War, and Brett had just made his triumphant return with Val Venus and actually won Civil War. So I did the only rational thing I could, and I reached out to my good friend to come on and talk about his return to Civil War and winning the Battle Royal itself. We ended up talking about a multitude of things, and while it was difficult to pick out one thing, there was one that, while I don't personally remember it, I did want to add into this Best Of podcast. Apparently someone had applied as Roderick Strong, and their application was, well, pretty stellar. Just take a listen to some of the stuff that was included.
He need a biography. He doesn't know what the hell that is.
His work speaks for itself. Just look at who he is, you know?
Yeah. Here's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
When I read that. You find the EWA, however you find it, whether it be from the TNA Fed or you find it through a series of Googling E-Feds. You come there. You see the application, all right? And then you make your application, and it gets to the part that says biography. And your brain goes, what the hell are they looking for right here? A biography? Like, I'm not writing a book about this guy. And so you just go, I don't know what the fuck this is. This biography. What are you talking about?
Well, the thing that gets me is that you would think somebody who wanted to not fill out a biography would pick a character that anybody else gave a shit about. Who wants to join a Fed as Roderick Strong?
I'm not going to lie. I don't even know who that is.
I think he's an ROH. I don't know. Some guy.
It took me 5 podcasts to finally reach across the pond and have a European member of the EWA on the EWA podcast. I wound up contacting Bryce to come on for what I dubbed the All-American EWA podcast. Pretending to not know he was Scottish, I became offended and tried to sign up as Drew McIntyre to get back at him. That was only a minor highlight in a great podcast. Bryce went on to host his own podcast called The Bagpipe Report, and I'm proud to call it a brethren to the EWA podcast because it truly is another great addition to this already great eFed. Talking with Bryce, we talked about how role plays are perceived by different writers and how they should be perceived. Bryce had some great insight on how he looks at his Shark Boy role plays. Take a listen.
I'm going to now because I remember reading one of the very first role plays I read whenever I got here was a Shark Boy one where he was having a dream.
Ah, Stone Cold.
Yes, the Stone Cold one. Now, I want to talk to you. Well, how do you see role plays in the world of eFeds? Do you see them as reality television-based things where, like, this is something the fans are going to see? Or do you see it as just they're not being filmed and it's just an abstract version of, like, this is just life going on outside of them being in the ring?
I suppose the latter. Kind of, it's with the invisible camera, so to speak. Just following the guy around in his everyday life. That's try to tell a story at the same time. That's just what I try to do.
Because then you start getting into the use of dreams and flashbacks.
Yeah.
And then you start to wonder if your role play is being presented as like a sitcom television show, or if this is just organically happening in your character's life.
When I think of role playing, I think of kind of writing almost a short story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. I try and make it as interesting as possible with those three bits. Like I planned out my role plays every time I role play. I can never just open a blank document in Microsoft Word. I've always got to plan out what's going to happen in it and when it's going to happen, just so I can be sure I've got like decent material in it. Because I can't be trusted when I go off on a tangent. I can talk a lot of shite at the time my role play, so I've got to have everything planned out just in case. That's how I go about it anyway.
Podcast 6 was a real shit show, as I had Fuzz, Cleve, and Jazz all on. Now I know what you're all thinking. Those of you who remember this podcast probably think I'm going to go down the route of including the biker gang that tried to kidnap Fuzz here. But I decided to go down a different route, as I have different podcasts with Cleve and Fuzz. A question was asked of Jazz about the origin of the Heath Slater character and the genesis of a storyline that, well, Jazz didn't exactly stick to with Heath Slater. Maybe he can tell you better himself.
Yeah, and Jazz?
Yeah.
How about your portrayal of Heath Slater? Where do you get that from?
Well, the original run before I switched him over was a little bit of the actual Heath Slater, but it's more or less my stepdad. He like grew up in like the sticks. Like he's a hillbilly. He does a lot of stupid shit, and that's basically he's basically Heath Slater. So
I do want to talk about your initial run as Heath Slater. You had him come in as a southern rock band member type thing. Like he played local bars, and he actually got his hand bit off by a crocodile, and had a prosthetic hand. Yeah. But there was some confusion with your opponent. Yeah,
it turned into an urban legend. Yeah, I think I had my very first feud was with James, who plays MVP / Abraham Washington, and he would address it as I just had a stub, and then I think I faced Ed. One of Ed's monikers Ed's runs is Antonio Cesaro, and he had where I just had a hand but no fingers, and yeah, so it's been all kinds of variations.
It was right around Podcast 7 where the EWA Podcast finally started to take shape, and it finally started to become something of, well, a mainstay here in the EWA community. It was with great guests like Dylan, the Snowman, that I was able to keep doing this week in and week out. With guests like Dylan coming on and talking about the depth of not just their comedy characters like Al Snow, but their other characters like Steve Blackman, it really gave this a platform for people to come on and talk about things that were important to their characters, storylines, and just have some fun. Here, Dylan and I talk about Steve Blackman and how Dylan used him in comparison to his real-life counterpart.
Taking the Steve Blackman character and turned it into, I hate to say respectable because, Steve Blackman was a professional wrestler for, about 5 to 7 years, which is respectable in its own right. But
That's
I
fine.
always find it interesting when people take these characters and give them these stories, like whether it be Val Venus with the blue collar worker or the stuff you've done as Steve Blackman, especially here in the last year whenever I've got to see you. But guys like Paul Burchill, Rene Dupree, I think this is part of the allure of e-fetting, is to take these guys and give them the fame and success that they never had in real life. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, that's kind of like why I picked those guys. I like picking. I don't like picking the guys who already have won everything, because that's no fun. I like picking the guys who haven't done that well and have like a blank slate, because then you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, totally.
Like The Rock being Big. Oh no, Big being The Rock. A lot of the stuff he writes as is just The Rock.
Right.
And whereas with Steve Blackman, you don't have anything to base it on. You just get to make up your own catchphrases and make up whatever you want. So I like that. It's more fun to kind of make up your own world based on like a real character.
There are about 100 different parts of EWA Podcast number 8 that I could take and put in this best of montage. Sitting down and talking with John was like sitting down and talking with, what was that robot's name from the Marvel Universe? I bet John knows. Somebody should just ask him about it, right? Anyways, talking with John about the EWA in general was just an amazing treat for me. He's a super humble guy who's more talented than anything in this entire world. These compliments sound written down and just made up, but I promise you, John, I think very highly of you. Anyways, John went on to give some great advice to those who were just starting out in the EWA, and that's why I added this part of his podcast into this best of series. So I hope the newbies are listening, because John had some amazing words for them.
In the EWA, I mean, there's just so many people who sign up, and they either last, like a week or not even that, or maybe like a month or so. But it's, I guess, because we're so competitive here, like the quality of the role-playing and storylines and everything is just so high. Maybe it can be a bit intimidating to some people when they sign up and, they lose a couple of matches and think, oh, this Fed's not for me, sort of thing. Yeah. But, to those people, I'd say just stick it out and do your best and don't really care, how the results go. I know it's hard to say, but just enjoy the ride, sort of thing. That's what I try and do. Don't really care about wins and losses these days. I just hope I'm telling a good story and hope people enjoy it.
In Podcast 9, it was how the turntables have turned as Brett came on the podcast for an unprecedented third time in 9 podcasts, but he didn't come back as a host this time. No. This time Brett was the host, and this time Craig was the guest. And Brett had some questions for Craig. And while there were a multitude of things from this podcast that could have been used for a best of, when I was listening to it, there was one part that stuck out to me that I thought those of us who have been around for a while might enjoy. Oh my, how I do regret saying this.
Yeah. So kind of going on and thinking about your favorite matches and what you want to do with Cody Rhodes, do you have an opponent that you haven't faced yet that you kind of really just want to have an all-out great match with?
Yeah, I do. This sounds bad. I really want to have a match with Punk. Like, I just love the way that TZ plays him. And yeah, it's kind of just a straight shoot of the CM Punk that we see on TV, but there's just, I don't know, like there's just so much more that he does with it. He does a great job. And, we had that triple threat match a couple of weeks ago, and when I was reading his stuff, I was like, man, like I would just love to do just like a full on month with this guy and do some fun stuff with him. But like I haven't done stuff with Angle. I did a little stuff with Carino, but we never really had a match. The heavy hitters in the EWA, I've not really been able to rub elbows with them. Blackman, Carino, Venus and we did some stuff, but I would love to do some stuff with Angle and Punk in the future down the road.
I imagine you'll get your chance.
Podcast 10 was the unthinkable podcast. It was the podcast we all wanted whenever we first started hearing them. And it took 10 of them to do it, but we finally got it. Podcast 10 was the one where Newt came on. And there's been nothing better in my time doing these podcasts than having Newt on and getting to pick his brain about all sorts of subjects. If you haven't listened to Podcast 10, I suggest you go to the archives and give it a listen, because it is seriously one of my favorites, if not my favorite thing I've ever done around here. This part of the Newt podcast talks about what Newt looks at when judging and basing a winner in a role play contest, basically. A match. What the hell am I trying to say? Just take a listen.
All goes into the decision-making process for picking a winner? Like, is it everything? Is it every single little detail, like down to the time a role play was posted, or is there just like the actual writing is all you're judging?
I just flip a coin.
That's what it seems like sometimes.
It's the easiest way. No, it's everything. And I always say, and if you've ever lost a big match, you'll get one of these PMs from me, and I'll say there was a bunch of intangibles that you couldn't possibly fathom that went into this decision.
I've got that before.
Yeah, and I say that a lot, but it's the truth. Let me give you an example. You talked 3 or 4 podcasts ago about, well, the new guys always come in and they lose the first match, and it's just like a rite of passage. Well, that's not really true. Mm-hmm. What happens is there are intangibles, and I believe in building momentum. And the momentum can be cut off. But let's say you've been Cody Rhodes and you've done all this stuff for the past 3 or 4 weeks, and the new guy comes in and it's Freddie Joe Floyd. And you and Freddie Joe Floyd match up, and you guys are perfect. You both write 4,500-word RPs down to the letter. And nobody's got a spelling mistake. Nobody's got anything. And the general consensus is about the same 100% across the line. So then I have to look at intangible elements. Well, you referenced something you did 4 weeks ago, and you talked about some of your history and these things. Well, that might put you a little bit ahead of him just because he doesn't have that much to work off of. Right. This is why new guys lose a lot, because if you're both just coming in and you both cut, I'm going to kick your ass promos, but one guy has a little bit more of an intangible push because he's been writing about things that have been going on. He has a little bit of a storyline going on. You crossed paths with Brie Bella, and you mentioned that in the RP. Well, then that, to me, is a little bit of a bonus in your favor. Now, that does not mean a new guy can't come in and you both cut, I'm going to kick your ass promos, and you just ramble on about whatever, and he creates a fascinating story, and I'm like, wow, this guy, he's new, but fuck, his story's great, you know. Yeah. Because he may be able to draw on things that you can't, even though because you've been stuck in the EWA mold, he's able to say, well, I was, here, there, or wherever the last few weeks, and I did this, and I've been building to this. So sometimes I think that helps those guys. But to me, I look at everything. I look at word count, and I don't ever go in there and necessarily count words, but I mean, if you write a 4-line RP and John writes a 400,000-line RP, right, chances are he's going to win. Unless he misspelled every word, you might have him.
You might be opening the floodgates with that statement for longer type role play. So you may want to quantify that.
Anybody that says that, I do not care for longer RPs. If it gets too long and I'm getting bored reading it, guess what? That's probably not in your favor.
Right.
And I have to read every RP. So short, sweet, and to the point is the absolute
most. For podcast 11, I had the leader of the Zaibatsu, Jeff, on. Jeff had a multitude of things to talk about and really gave some insight and depth into the Zaibatsu story. He also talked about his time working on the Republican Linda McMahon campaign trail. In the podcast, I said she was Democrat, and I kind of got called out for it, so this time I wanted to make amends on it. When it came down to time for the game, Jeff got Penis in Uranus, and Jeff finally kind of came out and showed his disappointment with the WWE product currently. Go ahead and take a listen. It kind of rings true to how it goes today.
Here's my friend. What is the biggest penis in Uranus?
About the WWE is mainly that they just don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. They really don't. And it's one thing after another with them. And when they seem to throw people a bone, like making Ziggler champion or pushing the right kind of guy, they fuck it up with stuff like Kofi Kingston being United States champion and stuff like Team Hell No going far too long with that bullshit gimmick that they were pulling. And it's just, they got to stop with the slapstick. And it's not the return to Attitude Era stuff, because that's just not feasible.
Right.
But that stuff just pisses me off. It's the hokey bullshit that isn't really that necessary anymore.
It was the first EWA podcast recorded in Kansas City, whereas all the other ones had been recorded from my Lake of the Ozarks home. It was also one of my favorites, as I had Fuzz on by himself. It was right around the time of Lethal Lottery, and Fuzz had a big match, the Grand Slam title match, as a matter of fact, coming up against CM Punk. Now, while Fuzz has never been known to shy back and hold anything back, this was not an exception. I came out and I asked Fuzz if he thought members of the EWA universe wanted the Vegas Connection to lose. Go ahead and take a listen to this response.
The members of the EWA universe want the Vegas Connection to lose?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, originally, like, when we won the tag team championships, we thought it was a good idea to have, like, this powerhouse tag team to hold on to the belts, and that it would create competition, and that it would really, like, it would empower everybody to, like, start a tag team, and, like, we would just be, this division would flourish because of how great we were. But then what ended up happening was nobody stepped up, and we just kept winning, and then it got to the point where I do feel like every single person, including ourselves at times, want to see us lose. But ironically, though, everybody wants to see us lose, yet nobody is willing to step up and just try and beat us. Everybody would just prefer to, like, bitch, like, oh, these guys won again, or oh, fuck the Vegas Connection. But, like, honestly, like, if you want to see us lose and you want to see the belts on somebody else, just step up and beat us. Like, we've always, aside from the Coalition, we've never tried to avoid facing anybody before. And and I'll explain. It's interesting because the Coalition decided to beat every single combination of teams in the EWA before challenging us.
Almost like earning their shot at you instead of just claiming it.
Right. And simultaneously, Cleve and I kept saying, thank God those guys haven't asked for a title shot yet, because I think they might be the guys.
In the week leading up to Red, White, and Bruised, the match between Cody Rhodes and CM Punk was being built up to catastrophic levels. I say that being the handler of Cody Rhodes, of course. But to make things more interesting, I decided the week of Red, White, and Bruised to have the handler of my opponent that week, CM Punk, Teasy, onto the podcast. Teasy is known as one of the best riders from last year, and while he didn't make it through the whole year, his impact on the EWA cannot be denied. Another thing Teasy was known for were his longer role plays. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there was certainly a specific length to Teasy's role plays that you didn't see with other people's. I decided to just come out and ask Teasy about that himself. His response did not disappoint.
Do you think that there's resentment towards you due to the length of your role plays?
Yeah, I do. A little bit. Like, I try not to, and I don't really take it personally. I know that not everybody wants to sit down and read, because I'm aware that what I write is long, but I never have set out...
Is that important to you, to make sure that what you're writing is long?
No, not at all.
I mean, I know it's not that it's long, because it's full of content and it's full of important things, but is the fact that you're churning out 3.5 to 5,000 words plus per role play, is that something that you shoot for, or is that just something that happens?
No.
I
just I don't want to write a short role play, and short to me is going to be very short. Like, I don't want to put up something that's just one page worth of, even if it tells a great, like, I need to write for me, like what I do, always just, it winds up that way. And I feel like if I was writing less, then I wouldn't be able to tell as successful of a story.
Podcast 14 gave us something that we thought we would never hear. It was like when Brett and Vince and Sean all finally sat down and decided to talk things out. Or whenever, I can't think of two other people that have a history. I mean, let's face it, Ed and I are like the Brett and Sean of the EWA, I would have to believe. Only Newt is the one screwing Ed? That doesn't make any sense. Anyways, someone's getting screwed, and it's not me. But anyways, I had Ed onto the podcast, and what was critically panned as one of the best podcasts that there had been to date. Ed didn't disappoint, and there was a point in there where, listening back to it, was one of my favorite stories from the EWA Kanan. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I enjoyed doing it.
I got drunk and forgot to post. I still have that role play saved in Microsoft Word. It's a funny thing. Should post it now. Maybe I can get like a post-dated win.
Yeah,
But-
and then now, don't you like send role plays through accounts, and you kept like low key role plays on El Generico and all kinds of other stupid shit?
Oh yeah, was it you that hacked my El Generico account?
Oh fuck yeah, that was me.
Oh, you're such a dick. How'd you do that? How'd you get? Brett gave you the password, didn't he?
This isn't confession time on the EWA podcast.
Fucking kill that guy. He hides behind his smile, this whole good guy shit. And look,
I remember he messaged me. He's like, "Dude, I have Brett's El Generico password," and I go, "Why don't we?" I was like, "Why don't we book him in a match against himself?"
You asshole.
And in that booking thread, I was like, "I'll take on Jericho or whatever," and you're like, "What the fuck is this shit?"
I was so mad for like 5 minutes. I thought it was Sir. I'm like, why would Sir do this? Like, I don't get it.
But then that Sarah sent out that mass email that was like, "Hey, respond to this if your email is connected to your account," because I made my email attached to your El Generico account.
Oh,
so each time you tried to recover your password, it sent it to my email.
Because I know Brett had hacked my account. Because I foolishly gave him my password, and he wouldn't give me the password for like 4 hours. I wanted to kill him, and then you bastard. See, I'm not. I don't know why I never guessed that. Because he swore up and down that it wasn't him, and in reality, he wasn't lying. It wasn't him.
Leading up to Summer Stampede, there was a three-way dance for the national title coming up, or maybe it was Metal Mayhem. Anyways, it was sometime in the summer in a match between Ken Anderson, Eddie Kingston, and Heath Slater. So I had the three competitors on one podcast. Having Will, Jazz, and Brian there did not disappoint, and it was very informal and a lot of fun. I asked a question, or posed a question to the three that Jazz was the only one that answered, but still it was a fantastic answer about the level of competition, commitment, and desire in the differences, basically, between the national title level and the Grand Slam championship level. Go ahead and take a listen.
That's understandable. So after Eddie Kingston had his match with Cody Rhodes, Cody Rhodes turned around and wound up in the Grand Slam title scene with CM Punk. Of the guys that are in this potential match coming up in the next pay-per-view, between the three of you, who would you say is most ready to take that step to the next level, would you say? Jazz, I'm going to go ahead and let you go first on this one. Of you guys, who do you think is ready to take that jump right now to the next level?
Boy, well, I mean, I don't know. It takes a certain level of commitment, I think, a certain... I really don't know. I can't really say.
Just say yourself, Jazz. Just say yourself.
Me, personally, I would think I'm ready for the Grand Slam championship scene. No, I don't know. I don't really think any of us are there yet, quite frankly. It's not a knock. It's just, once you take that step, it requires even higher level of commitment. I know just from talking and with Craig a lot and talking with Brett a lot is, you really have to step up your game, and you really have to bring it every single role play, and you don't get a night off, quote unquote, or you don't succeed. I don't know if any of us are there yet. I don't know if any of us want to be there yet, I think is the better thing to say. I think I could see where any one of us could eventually take that step when we're ready, but I don't know who's ready. But so.
Episode 16 saw the return of JD to the podcast. JD, much more outgoing and, dare I say, friendly in this podcast. A question was posed to JD during this podcast, but we didn't exactly get the answer we were looking for. In fact, I would say JD was a little distracted during this question.
All right, so other than Suicide, who are some other guys that are up and coming or new or somewhat just people that you are enjoying reading their stuff right now?
Well,
Do you read anybody's stuff, JD?
Never, ever.
All right, then. Who are the people that you've heard are really good that you're going to pretend that you've read their stuff?
Sorry, I'm getting distracted. What? They're in the living room.
Who's that? Do they want to be on the podcast?
Little shelf thing.
JD's roommate.
Walking.
Who have you?
What? He can't hear you.
JD.
Go through.
JD's friend.
Okay, now turn around and look up.
There's nothing there, JD. It's just the ceiling. Why are you telling me to do this? Do I need to edit this part out? Or is this like when Pylum had a barbecue grill delivered last week?
Oh, that's up to you. This is nothing. This is my roommate looking for light bulbs.
Okay, let's break away from that question. Does your roommate have any idea what the hell you're doing right now?
No.
Does he have any idea about the EWA?
Yes. He actually put in an application like a year ago.
And who was he supposed to be? Razor Ramon?
No.
No.
Mick Foley.
Mick Foley. And what happened?
I gave him this idea to run with the character. I told him he actually used to do some writing himself with one of these feds.
Yeah.
A different one, obviously. And I was like, yeah, this fed's awesome. You should check it out. And he's like, da-da-da-da. And I was like, is it real wrestlers, fake wrestlers? I was like, it's real wrestlers. So you could be whoever you want. And his first response is, Chris Benoit. I'm like, no, you son of a bitch.
EWA Podcast 17 was done right after Summer Stampede. It was the day after, and a Code Red APB was put out to have Bryce on the podcast as soon as possible. For at Summer Stampede, it was revealed that the month-long Suicide character was actually Kurt Angle underneath a mask. Now, while there were some emotions shown, perhaps, in this podcast, it was still one of my favorites, as the culmination of a fantastic storyline came to the storytelling aspect here on the EWA podcast. Here, Bryce lets us in just a little bit on the whole genesis of the story and how it came about, or at least how he wanted it to end.
You want the whole story?
Pretty much, yeah. The genesis and coming about. How long did you think you were going to have to wait as Suicide to get a shot at CM Punk?
I was expecting, maybe 6 months, 7 months, but like Newt said in the thread for the Bagpipe Report, there was nobody grabbing the title at that point. There was nobody saying, I'm the guy. So I just kind of took my place and says, you know what, I'll do it now.
And what would have happened if TZ and CM Punk had lost in this road to redemption?
Would have beaten Cody Rhodes.
So you would have went for the title, not for Punk.
I think I would have went for Punk after that. I don't think the title was the main thing. The fact that Punk had the title was, even better than I would have expected. But I probably would not have gone for the Grand Slam if Punk hadn't won, because my promos were based towards Punk. They weren't based towards Punk and Rhodes.
Right.
So it was all to do with the Angle Punk feud.
Right.
For podcast 18, I had Brady on. Now, Brady, who I believe before this podcast was completely misunderstood as a person, came to be completely understood after this podcast by being exactly who we thought he was. Right, Brady? But in all seriousness, Brady showed the depth of his thoughts and how into his character and the character's development he gets by talking about the arranged loss he had for Richie Steamboat on Fury.
So certainly one of the biggest ups of your time with Steamboat was Lethal Lottery and getting a chance to work with Suicide. Of course, you guys didn't know your partners going in, but what was your reaction to seeing the run Suicide and Richie Steamboat made in Lethal Lottery?
Well, I was happy, and I've been happy with respect to every time there's been a match that's resulted in a loss for Richie, it's been somebody's had to pull it out their ass.
Yeah.
And the write-up of it has been great. Kudos to whoever's been doing that.
Mm-hmm.
The one time that I did, I don't know how many people's done it, and I don't mean to sound like a braggart when I say this. The one time where I told, hey, Newt, let me lose to the Fury opponent. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that went through his mind. What? What are you going to lose to him for? To prove a point, to do something with my character. And so, to me, I felt like it was perfect to do.
I kind of went through. I think I kind of remember it going collectively through all of our heads. I know Brett and I talked and was like, Richie Steamboat lost on Fury, right? like we all saw that, right? Okay, so I'm glad that was planned and not Newt just being like, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm gonna have you lose on Fury.
No, he didn't screw me over. Richie screwed Richie, so to speak.
Okay, good.
Podcast 19 is one of my personal favorites, as it had Brian Powers return for a solo act this time. It was kind of an impromptu one, as he reached out to me that day and said, let's record a podcast right now, and I decided to oblige him and do so. What culminated was one of my all-time favorite stories from any podcast ever. Brian does some independent wrestling on the side from whatever it is Brian does. And Brian talked about his experience, his first show experience, as a matter of fact, working in a battle royal. The story tells itself, but Brian's delivery is spot on.
I would feel like, me personally, and maybe this is for everyone else too, like, we'd all imagine that we'd be really good in that situation. We're like, oh, I've been watching wrestling for like 20 years. I would totally kick ass in a battle royal and just sell everything and stuff. I'm sure once you're in there, you're like, oh, there's no one to fucking hit right now. Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Is that what it's like in there?
Yeah, because that battle royal was actually my first time in front of people.
Oh.
And so you get at a point where you just you almost freeze, because if there's not somebody right next to you, you don't know what to do, and you don't want to look like an idiot just standing there.
You don't want to sell like what someone just did to you 10 seconds ago. So you're just like, so if there's like two guys in the corner, do you just go over and just start helping them?
Yeah, pretty much.
Because that's really what it looks like. If you watch Royal Rumbles, that's what happens a lot. Like there's a one I just watched the other day where Greg Valentine was just confused, and so he just went over and started hitting this guy in the back. But the guy didn't sell it at all. He was just like, "You're not supposed to be here, dude. Like get the fuck out of here."
One of the guys just got done working me over in the corner, and he goes to leave, and so I look up to see what I'm going to go do next, and all of a sudden there's this guy's name is the Native Assassin. He's this big, huge Indian guy. I see him across the ring, and he just takes off running and hits a splash on me in the corner.
like you didn't see it coming, but you kind of did?
Yeah, like I saw it coming at the last second.
What do you think was going through his head? Like, oh, look, that dipshit Brian's over there in the corner not doing anything because he's lazy. I'm just going to splash the fuck out of him.
Podcast 20 saw the return of the GM Harry Smith man, Newt, to the podcast, and while we covered a vast array of subjects once more in a very well-received and well-liked podcast, there was one point that stuck out to me. While Newt doesn't tell us a whole lot about his personal life and who he is outside of the EWA, I did manage to find out how often he thinks and comes up with ideas for the EWA in his personal life.
Claim and rise up to that level. So, I mean, it has its pros as well as its cons. You mentioned something there that you were thinking about TZ's reign just the other day. I want to ask you this. In your personal life, when you're not on the EWA website, how much do you think about the EWA and what's going on and what you'd like to do and where it's heading?
Not a ton. I'm hearing myself in the background. Sorry. But I mean, it does come up when I'm just, and I don't know what brought the TZ thing, but I guess I was thinking about all the people that had left, and it's unavoidable for me to not have some of that stuff bouncing around in my head and ideas, popping around in my head or whatever, just because I'm just entrenched in it all the time.
Right. What do you think about the most though? Like you would think about like storylines and where you want to see them head. Do you think about like cool pay-per-view concepts? Do you think about match results and match ideas? Like what do you spend your time thinking about whenever you're just like basically daydreaming about the EWA?
when I'm daydreaming about the EWA,
it's always Steve in his small hand.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's mostly just me and Steve in sexual positions. I think he'd get that whole little hand up my ass.
All of our asses.
Yes. No, probably storylines and stuff. I mean, I like that kind of stuff. I don't really think a ton about. Well, I mean, I guess that's not true. I think about like storylines in matches. I don't really think about writing. I have nightmares about writing matches, but. So I think about, maybe storyline elements of a match coming up and something that I think could be interesting that could happen, or a cool finish might pop into my head or whatever. And I'm like, I got to find a way to use that, or storyline suggestions or that sort of thing. And then, to that extent, maybe sometimes some kind of pay-per-view concept or, a match that would be interesting at the pay-per-view. Just people, well, we can match these guys up because they've both been, moving up the card and doing some good things or whatever. But, I mean, it kind of depends on...
Podcast 21 saw a first appearance for an EWA, or at least a long-standing EWA member, which is pretty rare in the podcast days. Am I right, guys? Guys? No? All right. Anyways, Podcast 21 saw Corey come onto the podcast. Corey had been really making some noise as the Dean Ambrose character, and Corey gave some insight into the Dean Ambrose character and what goes into the writing process with him. Go ahead and take a listen.
Just kind of straight taking it from there, but you're doing some, I don't want to say dark stuff with him, but you're doing some alternative stuff with him. You're listening to some weird rock music about masturbation and stuff, right?
Yeah, pretty much. No, the thing that I like about writing, John Moxley was a character that I'd used in Feds before, and it was something that never seemed to work out before for one reason or another. So the fact that I'm writing Dean Ambrose and it's being well received and it's working's great. But with Dean, it's really, I mean, I'll be honest. The reason I got back into fedding is to get better at writing, because I used to write a lot throughout school. And then e-fedding became a place where I could do that. So with Dean, I have this background to draw from, this really shitty childhood and teenage years. That's made him a really bitter and just misanthropic person.
Right.
So what I've been able to do with that, with the darker stuff, is I like having this character that I could have a problem with anyone.
Right.
And I think that's what helps with this person. It keeps him always interesting is anyone on the EWA roster, I could find an angle for why Dean doesn't like that person.
Right.
And I feel like it's a good hook to run.
And then finally, Podcast 22. The last podcast during Podcast Week saw the Snowman come on and talk about his latest BWO roleplay against the Daniel Bryan character. We talked about what went through his head when he was coming up with these BWO roleplays. And while he didn't give me a specific answer, he did give me a very Dylan answer. And that's just as good, if not better.
And at the time of this podcast, you have a match coming up with the new Daniel Bryan.
Yes, I do.
And have you and you posted one roleplay about PR.
Yeah.
I tried to read it before I came in here and did this podcast with you. There's a lot of stuff going on in there, Dylan.
Did you read it?
I got through a good portion of it.
Did you get to the newspaper?
The new super?
The newspaper.
Oh, the newspaper?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the big meanie and what happened there. How do you come up with half this stuff?
That was my favorite bit. That was going to be something different. The picture, I'm going to spoil the roleplay for everybody who hasn't read it, which is everybody. But the picture was, in my head, I had the idea of a newspaper, and on the front cover of the newspaper was Fat Man Dresses Dog. And there was going to be a picture of the Blue Meanie holding up a dog that was dressed up like Superman or something. And I thought that was really funny because it's a really stupid thing to put on the front of a newspaper. Yeah. And then I started photoshopping it, and it didn't work. So I changed it to Fat Man Eats Dog, which was way funnier. And you got a brilliant picture of the Blue Meanie eating that dog. So I thought, well, we'll go with that then. Fat Man Eats Dog.
Yes, but how do we start from point A and get to point B where the Blue Meanie is eating a dog?
Well, that's it. I just thought, like, what would be really funny? Oh, yeah, I know. The Blue Meanie dresses up a dog. That's really funny. I don't know what. I can't really explain it. Just, like, that's what happens with Alice Neuroplay. I just start thinking of really stupid stuff. And then I go, well, I can write that. That's brilliant. Because, nobody reads them. It's perfect.
And nobody else could get away with that.
Yeah, I think so. But, I don't know. It's probably because I've been doing it for so long,
Yeah. Well, the Al Snow Eddie Kingston match had such a secondary dynamic to it because Will was playing Kingston as this super intense, pissed off at the world. He's the complete antithesis of Al Snow. And then Will came out and personally, I thought, had a great second role play, the one where it was very Al Snow-like.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. I actually thought that was really, really well done.
Yes, where he... But I think it wound up being a dream sequence. But in there, he was messing with Glacier and Ice Train, and was riding a bus with a dog. And, I guess what I'm asking is, how does that make you feel that this is what, at times, people have resorted to?
I like it. I like it because an awful lot of the time, whenever people roleplay against me, you'll see really CME role plays. You know, like a lot of people either avoid talking about me as much as they can. You know, it'll be like a wee character development role play, and then at the end it'll go, you know, by the way, Al Snow, you better watch your back or I'll stab you in the gut. You know, or it'll be like a big serious throw, and it's just like, oh, Al Snow, he's a big joke. You know what's not a joke? He punched you in the face next week. Ew! And it's
basically, everyone would have to come out and say the same thing. They're like, you know, your whole life's a joke. It's time for you to take this serious whenever you step in the ring next week. That's the basis of every opponent for Al Snow.
Pretty much. And I imagine that's because they go looking through the roleplay to pick on something. You know, like you could read a roleplay and you kind of react to it in your roleplay. You know, I know we don't do it too often, but Al Snow usually ends up fighting new guys who pop up on a match. I'm like, I'll give him a match, whatever. So you always see them kind of, I always imagine reading my roleplays, trying to pick up on something, you know, like, I'll get him on this, that son of a bitch, and they start reading the roleplay, and it's just, you know, Al Snow taking ballet lessons or something, and like, what the fuck, what the hell do I do for this?
Yeah, I imagine there must just be a confusion that sweeps over the newer members whenever that's what they see in, like, one of their first matches.
I kind of felt really bad about that as well, because, like, the EWA is a really, really good EFED. You know, it's like, it's easily the best one I've been in. It's got, like, incredibly talented role players. And then these new guys come in, and they're like, oh, EWA, I've heard a lot about this place. It must be really good. I'll have a match, please. Who's my first opponent? Oh, Al Snow. Oh, I bet he's really good. Yay. Oh, what the fuck is this? Oh, my God, this is the worst roleplay ever. The EWA is the worst EFED ever, and they leave, you know.
How many people do you...
So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. 22 podcasts in less than an hour. You just listened to the whole entire EWA podcast archive in less than 1 hour. Now, I'm sure you heard some quibbits and some fun things in there, and I implore you, if you have some extra time, please go out and visit the EWA archive and listen to some of the past EWA podcasts. From the actual EWA podcast to the Bagpipe Report, they're doing some amazing things around here. And I can't stress this enough, and I know I've said it repeatedly on the Bagpipe Report and the EWA podcast, but I absolutely love the sense of community here in the EWA. I love what we built, and I love that we can joke around and have fun with each other. It was about a year ago at this time that none of us really knew each other personally. There were definitely no Skype calls happening, and we weren't really communicating as friends as much as just communicating as people working with each other in an EFED. I'm glad to say that we don't do that now. I consider some people in EWA to be some of my best friends. I talk to Brett on a daily basis, and I talk to guys like Kyle, Brian, and a few others multiple times per week. I think you're all tremendous people, and I love working with you. You know, sometimes it's tough, and it is a competition, and you get yourself, you know, a little riled up, and, you know, sure, the sting of losing still hurts every now and again, but I can say this. I respect each and every person a hell of a lot more now whenever they beat me than I did before. Before, it was just anger and frustration at losing and wondering how that person can beat me. But because of things like the EWA podcast, the Skype calls, the chat rooms, getting to know each other, I just have, like, I respect the shit out of all of you. Like, I know the things you guys go through, and I know that you're going through the same things I am in your personal lives and your professional lives and trying to get this stuff done. And I know what it's like to lose. I know what it's like to win. And, you know, I try and be as humble as I can in my victories because, you know, I that's reciprocated to me and when you guys win. I think that we have the best EFED on the internet, and I think that's saying something with the quality of writers that we have here and the person we have at the head of it. I wouldn't trade the EWA for anything. I check it compulsively, not just because I want to read people's stuff as it's put up, but I want to, you know, have more fun things to talk about and, you know, chit-chat with you guys. To the new people who have joined, if this is your first podcast, thanks for listening. If you'd like to come on, feel free to send me a message on Skype. You can just shoot me a PM on the forum, and we can get something worked out. I'd love to have some new blood on. Maybe talk about how you found the place, what brought you here, what your motivation was for your character. We can talk about a plethora of things. So I want to thank everybody for listening to not just this one, but for the 22 previous podcasts. You guys are great, and who would have thought 22 podcasts ago that you guys would enjoy listening to me talk to other people about playing their character and other things going on in the world. You guys are amazing. I couldn't respect or thank you all anymore. And here's to 23 more podcasts, huh, guys? Have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.